This is our week 10 discussion board here, and I suppose we'll just jump right into it. Um, I picked three quotes, largely not from the eating disorder chapter, but I'll kind of go over each one and just what I was thinking about them before I get into the major questions here. The first comes from page 93, which is if, however, the social difficulties are the primary symptom of distress, taking time away from one's duties and social roles to pursue something like individual counseling may actually exacerbate the problem. And, I chose this specifically because I think it's a reminder of the importance of a whole person community concept for each culture group. I know that's one of the main themes of that chapter, but I think this really encapsulates it. Um, folks who are introverted or more individualistic may indeed find that taking a moment away from their social group allows them the time to heal and address what's going on. But when we look at individuals who find meaning in their own lives through their relationships with others, um, requesting somebody to heal by actively avoiding those things, I think really is a bit tone deaf, and really shows that we're not taking into consideration the whole of culture. The next quote that I particularly like is one that came from um, the clinician, counselor, or scientist. I'm not sure who she was, Miss Magruder, who's working in Zanzibar. And the quote is, when humans do not assume that they have rather complete control of their experience, they do not so deeply fear those who appear to have lost it. I think that's an incredible reminder of a similar concept here, which is that, our Western way of thinking is really quite individualistic, and it's particularly material, um, where we imagine sort of a scientific cause and effect to life, where we can take on that captain at the helm of our destiny sort of role. For the midst of American society, likely this is a reasonable thought process. But as we can see, even within our own culture, it breeds a lack of willingness to engage with some of those individuals who don't have that control. Um, somebody who has an uncontrollable mental illness, like the ones she's describing here, specifically folks with schizophrenia, there's a tendency to, with that sort of perspective, um, not only be frightened of what's going on, but really expect them to be able to control things. Because for us, that's what we can see. And that's the worldview that we're going from. For folks that don't have control over these parts of their lives. And I think a similar parallel is that with chronic illness, which we see quite a bit, not only with the population we'll be working with, but probably with our friends and family and loved ones. That can be almost a damning concept to throw at somebody. I think it speaks to a larger general sense of unease at these concepts that a human being could be taken by something they don't have control over, whether that's, IBS or post-traumatic stress or schizophrenia. This is a really solid reminder that there are things out there beyond our control that do require us to still have compassion and to understand that perspective of somebody who's not so totally in control, and to, instead of looking at it with fear or disgust or reproach, trying to find some way of looking at the life that can accommodate things happening that no person has control over. I think I'll address that a little bit further. The third quote that I have, it's a rather small one, comes from the chapter on the involvement of pharma companies and the sort of introduction of depression as a concept within Japan. And it came from one of the marketing ads that they had. And it was the quote, "Do not endure it. Go see a doctor." Which just reminded me that without having to advertise this concept into society, that concept may have never been thought of. Depression may not have been something to go see a doctor for. It may have been something that you handled independently. You handled with your community. You handled um, individually, but with a sense of sort of spiritual or personal meaning behind it as you try to navigate through it and saw this as one of the things in your life that you just had to go through and try to find some solution for. Um, I don't want to say that it really marks the trivialization of depression. I don't quite think that's the right phrase it. But it does show the commodification of it, where all of a sudden this was something that you could see your doctor for. It can be itemized, it can be treated. Um, and again, that was really the whole point of the chapter, but I think that really, really captured it, at least in my mind. What these quotes tell me about myself and about where we stand as a Western, you know, people is that each one of these is a really rather direct reminder of our individualism here. There's a question raised with each one of them on the value of this individualized, medicalized model of mental health that we have, where we consider evidence-based practices and structured research. And we have to compare that against the other myriad perspectives that individuals have developed to handle the same experiences and phenomena. I think a real good example of that is, and maybe this is less intense, right? Because I think it's less emotionally charged. It doesn't really assign blame. But when we think of hurricanes, right, we can now know that there's an objective reality behind what weather patterns develop into hurricanes. We can predict with some accuracy where these things will go, and yet there are probably 100 other perspectives that have developed throughout the world by people that have experienced these hurricanes for generations upon generations upon generations, who created rationales behind them that made sense for their world and offered them just a meaningful explanation of what was in front of them. And these quotes just kind of remind me that there's value in those things, even if not value for us as people who have been integrated within that sort of scientific Western rationalist worldview. I'll kind of go a little bit further into that. When we look at how these particular quotes impact how I'll approach clients and try to use greater cultural competence, I think it's important to realize that they force some introspection about whether or not these Western perspectives and the preeminence of objective thought, objective science and rationalism that we use, whether they offer tangible benefits to those that are unfamiliar, or I'll be rather brusque here, to those who are not already inoculated against the coldness and the sort of frailty of human condition that it presupposes. I think that's a little bit harsh, but truly, the basis of Western worldview is 18th, 19th century philosophical materialism and the scientific perspective of the Enlightenment movement, which does emphasize internal locus of control, objective measurements, trying to find the measurable and repeatable systems in place behind phenomena. those are not inherently incongruous with other cultural perspectives. And I think it's important that we just recognize that, wow, this is the lens that's sort of baked into us and that we may not be able to extricate ourselves from, um, just as other people may not be so immediately willing to extricate them from others. We do come into the relationship, people from other cultures, with a power dynamic in place that ensures our perspectives are taken with a real seriousness. Um, the people that come to us because they believe we have something to offer to them, and our words to them are going to carry some weight. Is it appropriate always for us to interject beliefs and perspectives that come from a Western materialist perspective into a possibly wholly separate belief system? Um, we have to think, does this offer clarity or does this offer confusion? You know, I think one of the big points of the book is, are we offering material benefits by trying to integrate a scientific perspective into what could be a naturally supportive, holistic, religious, or naturalistic worldview that explains the phenomenon in a different way? Um, it could just very well be that the sort of depersonalized perspectives of Western scientific tradition don't mix. And, it would be like asking somebody who does come from the Western world to like take one belief out of, let's say, traditional African religious worldviews and integrate that into the rest of your Western world. If all of a sudden we met with a doctor that we respected and trusted, and this physician, told us about the inherent power that any living creature or thing on this world could have. And they said with utmost confidence that we had to remember that we had chopped down a 300-year-old oak tree in our front yard. And by dissolving the power that that tree had, we have disrupted the forces in our home, in our yard, in our lives. And that has created the sort of confusion in the family dynamics and relationships of the land. That would be hard to integrate. And if we really truly believed it, because we believe this person has the power to heal, that this person has the ability to make other people's lives better, and that they're respected, like the Western tradition is, um, I think we might be at a loss for trying to integrate that into the rest of our world. Um, trying to really toe that line and find out what the cultural perspectives of our clients are before we interject some of these um, kind of cold perspectives, I think is really important. Because again, we don't want to do more harm than good. Um, I think the book made a really exceptional example out of the case of the family. I think it was also in Zanzibar, where the brother had become an expert in the sort of medicalized perspective on his sister's schizophrenia, um, because he like viewed it as this inherent problem that she had. They were no longer really allowed benefit from the other social perspectives and cultural values that may have been in play had he not been sort of injected with this idea. Now, to be fair, the real question is, do the benefits outweigh the negatives? Would she have benefited from staying untreated her whole life and just having an accepting, holistic worldview from her family that allowed her to integrate in her home? I don't know. The book makes the case that some of these cultures have less rates of extreme debilitation of people within those communities. perhaps due to these sort of, I don't want to say unserious perspectives, but this perspectives that downplay it. They don't see something like that as a serious mental illness. Even just injecting that idea could be disruptive. Um, the, our clinical judgment and also our insight as people to kind of figure out. I'll answer this last question here, and this is perhaps the spot where I'm by no means a real scholar, but I think it's important. Most of the course I use, I don't think have a very specific and direct with the Christian worldview, but there is one that I think does. And that's the quote that when humans do not assume that they have rather complete control of their experience, they do not so deeply fear those who appear to have lost it. And I believe, as an external voice here, that one of the great sort of like philosophically and spiritually supportive parts of the Christian worldview is its most basic premise that there is a loving and forgiving and just God who has a personal relationship with people and an intentional plan behind the joys and tragedies and life experience of each person. The idea that a person has rather complete control of their experience would contradict that at its most basic. And the inverse that the quote gives is that if you know that there are other powers at play beyond what you can understand, there's a willingness to accept things and know that this is just part of the plan. I did think of kind of an interesting parallel and how this fits in with scripture. And that's kind of looking at the Hebrew Exodus from Egypt. I sort of realized from the perspective of the Hebrews, they would have seen the hand of God in their actions. They would have known that they were walking towards their salvation, or at least following the man who they know followed God and saved them. If we were to imagine, the perspective of some 13th century atheist with some extreme, or 13th century BC atheist with some extreme internal locus of control, who would expect every person to have that full control over their experience, he would have seen it as a frightening insanity to just walk into the desert without a map, without plans, without great stores of food for the travel, without caravans of guards to save you from, wandering Bedouins or whatever. That concept that we could accept there could be something else in control, I think, is hugely comforting. And I think that really does align with the Christian worldview. And, to be fair, with the worldview, too, of the other religious groups that Magruder's discussing. I think that's all for the discussion board. I probably rambled a bit more than I needed to here, but I hope you all just a captive audience of watching, that is.